Oh my goodness.
Well, while we're waiting for everyone to grab their seats, I want to just say thank you. Thank you for buying your tickets. Thank you for supporting this. This has been a really big lift, and I'm just so grateful to have the support of this community. You guys, I'm just so very grateful. So thank you for that. Okay. I still see a few people coming in, but we may do a raise of the hand in a second again, but I'm going to do a few quick announcements because I want to give Paul as much time as we can. First of all, I want to say thank you again to the sponsors, all of the sponsors that have been running, all their logos that have been running during the breaks. I'm just so grateful also to them for supporting this community, being a part of this community, really helping us out. Especially, I want to thank a few key people, some of my key volunteers here. Sarah, Call, and Miranda organized the whole expo. Erin and her team ran that whole check-in table. Kat has been doing everything that I've asked of her. And Chris has been my number 2 today, and he's just he just hasn't questioned anything, even odd requests, but he's just been a real help to me. And so big thank yous to all of those volunteers. I'm going to be showing you some renderings in a minute, but then I'm really excited to show you from our architects. I'm actually jumping ahead, so I'm gonna actually stop that part of the conversation because I don't mean to start that right away. A big thank you to all of our speakers. Most of them have flown in, and it just feels really special to have experts from different parts of the country, even other countries, come here and share with us their expertise. A lot of times we do these events and it's a lot of locals, which is great. We have a lot of good expertise here, but it's, if we can really make Salt Lake a destination, and this kind of an event a destination for people outside of the Beehive, then it's pretty awesome because we can learn from them and it can be a real beautiful exchange. The last thing I'd like to do before I get into my formal presentation is to thank my husband, Steve Urquhart. I know many of you know him, and most of you think you're his best friend, and it's true. That's how he feels about you. But as we're developing some of this programming, some of these different pieces, the revival event that we do in the summer, I hope you're all coming. The Dell, I can't even think of what else. Other things I know we're doing. A huge part at TDA, a huge part of what we're trying to do is bake into the foundation a lot of diversity and inclusion. We want to amplify voices that are often unheard, and I hope you have noted that with these panels. It was a big lift to get the right people who knew a lot, but also have diverse experiences. And as Steve and I were putting the programming together, remember, he's a former politician. He loves the stage and a spotlight, but he knew that it wasn't his place to be up here this time. There's plenty of times that he gets the stage, but this time it was somebody else's turn. And I love that generosity of his, and I'm really grateful to be his life partner. Okay, I know you're not here to see me, but you're going to get me for a few more minutes because we are here. This is a fundraiser. That is the whole point of this event, is a fundraiser for a big dream. And one of the anchor points of that dream is the Paul Stamets Amphitheater. So I'm going to talk to you about the Dell for just a few minutes, and I'm going to show you some renderings, and then I will introduce Paul. Okay, oh, I have a slide. No, not yet. I went backwards. Can you go back, Justin? Okay, the Dell is, first of all, have you heard of the Dell? Okay, have you not heard of the Dell? Okay, over half have not. Okay, well, guess what? I'm going to tell you about the Dell. The Dell is 683 acres, 50 miles west of here on I-80. To give you context, that is 1 mile square and 8 times the size of Liberty Park. The property has mountains, a canyon, sand dunes, and a relatively flat area for festivals and gatherings. It has no neighbors as far as the eye can see. When you are on our property, you see no structures that don't belong to us. It's pretty amazing out there. The Divine Assembly, with the help of many of you in this room, acquired the Dell a year ago to create a sacred place for discovery, belonging, and celebration. To make sure this healing garden is enjoyed by a much broader community, the Dell will become its own standalone 501c3. So dream with me for a second. Okay, I'm not getting this. There you go. Dream with me for a second. Let's dream of what the Dell could be, and then I want to talk about what it actually is. The Dell will have gardens, orchards, old-growth trees, campgrounds to be used for festivals and overnight concerts, an outdoor kitchen, walking trails, outdoor art, and shade structures. The Dell is actually a perfect metaphor for those that the Dell is being built for. So right now, the Dell is much bigger than this, but I'm showing you this scarred land because that's where we're going to focus our growth. There's a lot of untouched land around there. We're going to leave it untouched, but for now, we're going to start greening it up and watering and planting and making it and building ponds so that it becomes something actually extraordinary. The Dell is a garden that will serve as an inspirational beacon in the darkness and will invite the world into a sacred sanctuary of discovery, belonging, and celebration. Many of you have already found the Dell. In 2023, we bought the Dell. We held several work days with hundreds of participants donating time, resources, and expertise to build fire pits, clean up trash, and harvest seeds. Importantly, you helped us dream of what it could be. We attracted the attention of world-class architects out of New York City, whose concepts I'm about to share. Thank you, Aranda Lash. We landed on the radar of Paul Stamets, who joined TDA, which is a pretty amazing thing. And we have a marketing team out of New York City and Salt Lake City who will help us get the right word out about the Dell to attract people who are looking for sacred magic. Thank you, Celia, Ted, Doris, and Arturo. We got the power and the water reconnected to this isolated spot, and we sent a half a dozen people down to Death Valley to learn how to build with cob, which will be applied to large and small structures at the Dell. Now I want to show you 3 anchor points. So there's a lot I could show you from the architects, but I'm only going to show you 3 things, and these are some of the things I'm most excited about. First, the Paul Stamets Amphitheater. And I want to tell you, I asked Paul if he wanted to see these renderings, because I said, I don't like surprises, so I would want to see it. And he sent back an email, I like surprises. So he's about to see it with you. So the amphitheater. The amphitheater is going, The amphitheater is, the architects have developed this concept and it feels like it was formed right out of the ground. For context, it will be the size of the Red Butte Amphitheater, but because we have no neighbors, we won't have any sound or time restrictions. The view beyond the stage, I'm going to move in. There will be no back wall, and all we will see is the beautiful wall, or the beautiful nature behind it. The amphitheater will be used for concerts, ceremonies. Oh, I went too fast. Concerts, ceremonies, celebrations, education, and whatever else you dream up, because we want this space to be yours. I'm very excited about this amphitheater. Next, the ponds. We are developing a series of 3 ponds on the land, one for swimming and human interaction, one that will be used to filter the water that runs through the pond system, and a third that will be off that main area, and it will be a little more friendly to the wildlife. And as you know, I'm so excited about that amphitheater, but we're actually going to build the pond, well, at least one of the ponds first. That way we can start using the land, and we can raise more money for the bigger projects like the amphitheater. So I'm really excited about that happening here. Here's a before and after of what the renderings could look like. So some waterfalls, some places to swim, a pier, and a beautiful beach that's naturally there. The last thing I want to show you is the labyrinth. The labyrinth is a gift from the architects at Aranda Lash. As it is currently designed, it is a 4-mile labyrinth that will take people over an hour to walk. The rocks will be laid by pilgrims to the dell. It will be an interactive art piece that we build together, one prayer rock at a time. We want and need you at the dell. Oh, I didn't go through those fast enough. It's going to be so pretty, you guys. I'm so excited about this. Okay. While watching this presentation, many of you have thought, oh, that sounds interesting, or I could help with something, or I hope they do this, or my expertise could be used in this way. And we want you to think like that. What we're looking for right now are people who can organize bite-sized projects. Think Eagle Scout project size. No triggers. Things that will take a bit of organizing, some resources, putting other people to work, and which can be done across a few days or a few weeks. While I'm talking about this, these are all the native plants that we're going to be able to plant there. We need some big machinery and operators. We need people who love bees, plants, butterflies, who can help us grow. We need people who will get their hands dirty, people who are ready to experiment. In addition, some of you are thinking about things you want to do at the Dell, the way you can organize an event. And we want to hear all of those kinds of ideas. But right now, we're in our fundraising stage. We need to be scrappy as we put these kinds of projects together. We know the Dell can be a healing space for the land, for the creatures that call it home, and for those of us who will venture out to experience the healing aspects for ourselves. If you have $1 million check, find me after. Actually, if you want to interrupt Paul with $1 million check, please do that. But in the meantime, this is a QR code. I'd love for you to take a photo of it. If your heart is open and you're willing to make a donation of any size, we will take it. While that sits up there, I'm going to introduce Paul and have him come up here. And then, just so you know what will happen, he's going to come up here and do his presentation. Then we're going to move this podium, and he and I are going to sit here and have a short Q&A. Some of you submitted questions online. That's how he prefers to do it. So we asked for questions through Instagram, and we received a lot of them. We've edited them down, so we'll be doing that. And then once that's over, I'll tell you what our next step is. Okay, Paul Stamets. is the world's leading mycologist. He is the author of 7 books, and I know he's working on another one now. He had a new psilocybin species that has been recently named after him, which I can't pronounce, and I'm not going to do it because I stumbled this morning. He was featured as a guide in the documentary Fantastic Fungi. That's when I was introduced to him. Who else? Fantastic Fungi, a lot of you. And his work with mycelium became a central theme in the new Star Trek Discovery series on CBS that includes an astromycologist character named Lieutenant Commander Paul Stamets. Friends, here is Paul Stamets. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm stunned. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for your support. You know, we live in the most critical of times. We're really at the nexus, at the precipice. I think our ancestors are calling to us now, our descendants are calling back from the future, asking us to step up, to be good Earth citizens, to show humanity and tolerance to each other, to build bridges across cultures and continents, across the centuries. So my talk is going to take you on a voyage, on a journey. But before I start, I would like to ask, and this is a safe question for many of you to answer, how many people in this audience have not taken psilocybin mushrooms? Don't be sheepish, that's okay. Wow. How many people here have not gone and found psilocybin mushrooms on a wild mushroom hunt? The majority of you. Well, this is your day. I'm going to take you on 5 psilocybin mushroom hunts in the course of this talk. So I want to acknowledge my partner, Dr. Pamela Crisco. Thank you so much. A lot of us from European descent are spiritual orphans. Because of the use of sacraments and psychoactive mushrooms, our use of those in our pagan ancestry were suppressed by Orthodox religion. The lesson from psilocybin is to share, is to spread this knowledge, to reach a hand out to a friend. It is not to create tithing and churches where you have to pay a minister to go have access to God. It's the universality of access to the divine. And because psilocybin is so powerful, and I think is a fundamental right for the freedom of consciousness that we all have, and for churches and governments to interfere with this, I think is a tremendous travesty. And this is time for us to rise up. What I'm seeing now across the world is just unprecedented. There's a worldwide awakening, a reawakening. And so I want to take you on my personal journey, but I'm just one knowledge keeper in a long lineage of knowledge keepers. And many of you here today are becoming knowledge keepers and are knowledge keepers. So this is not just Paul Stamets. This is a movement that's unstoppable at a time critical that we need to create the paradigm shift in consciousness to be able to save our species and to save so many species on this planet. For those of you who are skilled in evolutionary biology, you know that 99.9% of all species on this planet have become extinct. Extinction is a natural consequence of the existence and the evolution of life on this planet. We are in a unique position that we can choose to survive or we can choose to become extinct. This is a very important responsibility that you have to your children, to your children's children. So I want to first do a land acknowledgement. There was one done earlier, which I appreciate. We are here on this land through the kindness and generosity of the indigenous First Peoples, First Nations. I want to also acknowledge my mentors in the field of mycology. This is Dr. Michael Bugh on the left, Kit Skates, Dr. Daniel Stuntz, and Dr. Alexander Smith. Now, Michael Bugh is still alive. The three other individuals have passed on. Alexander Smith is considered to be the father of American mycology. He published many new species of psilocybin mushrooms. I met him when I was about 22 years of age. I was passionate in my interest in the taxonomy of psilocybe mushrooms. He recognized that. We became good friends. I was a long-haired hippie at the time. He was politically conservative, but he could see that sparkle in my eye of sincerity, of interest in the subject, and he had published on this. Alexander Smith asked me to do psilocybin mushrooms with him when I was 24 years of age in Snowmass, Colorado, with his wife Helen and him had an apartment. Amazing. The father of American mycology is asking me to do his first journey on psilocybin mushrooms with him. I thought about it for a long time, several moments, sitting in his apartment. That was a perfect Freudian slip, right? But then I turned to Helen and I said, Helen, will you do psilocybin mushrooms with us, his wife? And Helen said, no. I want to acknowledge my father, my mother, and my brother John, who's my tripping buddy. My father, at the end of his life, asked me, Paul, I want to do those mushrooms with you. Can we do those? He was not interested in marijuana and anything else, but the mushrooms, he thought, those are interesting. And he knew of my passion. And I asked my father, and I asked his wife, Mona, will you do psilocybin mushrooms with my father? She said no. I turned them both down. I turned them both down because I did not want to be the person at the end of their lives that have an extraordinary experience that shakes the very foundation of everything they believed in, and then the next day leave. And that's when I adopted the phrase, nature provides, I don't. The importance that and the responsibility that each of you have when you pass psilocybin mushrooms, this powerful sacrament to another individual, is to be with that person, to help them process, to help them understand, to build community. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I have to be there for those people. Now, I recently got a DEA license. I think this is one of the reasons why I got it. I passed my background checks. Who knew, right? But I say that, with sincerity, the DEA license I have has very strict guardrails. But it's my personal use of psilocybin I will never be an apologist for. Psilocybin was banned in 1971, the United Nations Charter, spurred by, President Nixon at the time in the United States. This is a time for us to rewrite and rechange the historical use of psilocybin for the benefit of society. My brother John went to Yale. I was the youngest one of my family. He was 5 years older than me. And he came back when I was 14, 15 years of age from Yale on break, and he brought this book, Altered States of Consciousness. My brother John went down to Mexico and Colombia, had these incredible experiences with psilocybin mushrooms. He came back, he told me about them, and oh my gosh, I just adored my older brother. But he was a serious chemist. We grew up in a house, a fairly large house, and a complete laboratory in the basement. Rows of shelves of chemicals. My father served on the Intrepid aircraft carrier during World War II. We got the Intrepid aircraft carrier radio in the basement, in my brother's chem lab, and he sat me in the corner, and I listened to coded messages behind the Iron Curtain while my brother John did serious experiments. So John went to Yale. I got the laboratory. He came back with this book. He lent it to me, and I voraciously read it. And my friend Ryan found it And I knew I was reading it, and my friend Ryan asked me to borrow the book. And I go, well, yeah, you can, but my brother's leaving soon to Yale, go back to school. He needs it back. It's one of his textbooks. So Ryan borrowed it, and then a few days later, Ryan, I need the book back. He's going back in a few days. And I kept on pressuring him, and Ryan kept on avoiding the subject. So finally, I cornered Ryan. I said, Ryan, my brother needs his book back. And Ryan looked at me sheepishly and said, I can't give it to you. I said, why? He said, my father found it and burned it. I said, your father burned my brother's book? I said, and so I told my brother. He was very upset at me. I was very ashamed. But I thought, if this book was so disturbing to Ryan's father, I think I found my direction in life. So there's John. He died a few years ago. This is the very day I gave my brother John and my mother my first book. I published Psilocybe Mushrooms and Their Allies 45 years ago. My first book when I was 22, 23 years of age. So I've been studying and immersed in psilocybin mushrooms for a very long time. Back then, it was very, very dangerous to speak of this subject. Even in the mycological communities, I was treated like a leper when I would go to societies and conferences because I had long hair and I was interested in psilocybin. But Alex Smith and Daniel Stuntz in Kit Skates took me under their wing. And we got a DEA license through the Evergreen State College. And that license also listed me. So I had this sort of envelope of protection from the DEA to be able to possess and to cultivate psilocybin mushrooms. So let's put this in perspective. There's now at least 141 known species of psilocybin mushrooms across the world. 141 of them. Now, most of these psilocybin mushrooms are very difficult to find. They're very hard to find, with a few exceptions. But I bring to you the concept that no one culture can claim ownership of psilocybin. In contrast to peyote, and the Huichols and Yaquis, I think they have a legitimate claim to peyote. And that sacrament should be preserved for them. But psilocybin mushrooms are very different. But think about psilocybin mushrooms versus peyote. Peyote is in existence for years. So your familiarity factor with something you see over years is very strong. Psilocybin mushrooms come up and disappear in 4 or 5 days. What was that? They may not be up for the next year or 2 or 3 years. So the cognoscente, the skilled mycologists within indigenous cultures all over the world, were a very eclectic group of knowledge keepers. Some mushrooms can kill you, some can feed you, some can heal you, some can send you on a spiritual journey. But because they're so ephemeral and so temporary and so powerful, the lineages and the strings of knowledge, the fabric of knowledge is frayed with the history of psilocybin mushrooms. It's been cut so many times due to war, religion, disease, climate change. So the fact that we are here today is a testimonial to our ancestral strength in sharing knowledge of psilocybin. This article was just published just recently by Bren Dentinger of Salt Lake City here, the Utah Museum, with Alexander Bradshaw. An extraordinary discovery they've made that psilocybin looks like genomically it arose about 65, 67 million years ago. And many of these psilocybin mushrooms had their form long before hominins and primates had evolved. These are ancient organisms. These are ancient vessels of wisdom. So let's look at the human migration patterns. And this is really important. There is no doubt that we're all Africans. We came from Africa. That is the birth of the human civilization, the human species. And we migrated. We migrated all over the world. The best evidence that we have for migration of humans to the Americas is 24,000 years ago. This is important that you people know that species migrate. In biology, we call this humans colonized Europe from Africa. Humans colonized the Americas 24,000 years ago. Now, colonization is different than colonialism, with all this absolutely disastrous consequences, suppression, oppression, all those things that we know that are fundamentally wrong. It is the nature of species to move. It's the nature of humans to move. And as they move and they migrate, they meet friend or foe on the trail. It's much better to have a friend than to have a foe. And so you exchange knowledge. You carry the wisdom from your ancestors as you migrate to new ecosystems. Recently, in the white sands of New Mexico, these footprints have been unveiled and authenticated as 24,000 years ago. There's one competing at the tar sands. There are marks on mammoth bones that look like there were cuts 100,000 years ago. You choose your number. It doesn't matter. More than 100,000 years ago, there were no humans in North, or Central, or South America. It had no humans at all were in the Americas. So I want to talk about the old world and the new world. The old world being Europe and Africa, Asia, etc. The new world being the Americas. We have excellent documentation of the use of psilocybin mushrooms in the new world, with the Mazatecs, the Aztecs, the Mayans. We have probable use of psilocybin mushrooms in the old world. I say probable for the reasons you'll see very clearly in a minute. I recently found that my Celtic heritage, my Druid heritage, originated from the House of Azure, which is great, the blue color, 30 miles from Stonehenge. I've been invited now back to Stonehenge with the Druids, who insist that psilocybin mushrooms were used by them for thousands of years. And inside Stonehenge, we're having a psilocybin mushroom ceremony on September 21st of next year. This is a rebirth of the interest that many indigenous peoples all over the world are rediscovering their heritage. And so this is something that I'm very passionate about. So there's a few sites here. The Rosalind Chapel is a really interesting site, but I want to show you a few of the sites here that we have very strong, hypothetical, probable evidence of the use of psilocybin mushrooms. And northern Algeria is the oldest in northern Africa, before climate change in the Tassili-Niger Plateau 7,000 years ago. The Tassili-Niger Plateau is known as a plateau of running rivers. Because of the Sahara Desert and the climate change, of course, that's not the ecosystem now. But interesting, there's aurochs, which are the predecessors to the modern cattle. They were found in the cave art that's associated with the bee-man figure that many of you know about. The bee-man, even though these figures were published in several anthropological journals, not a single scientist dared to suggest what the artist was trying to communicate. Because mushrooms are perishable, putting them into honey would prevent them from rotting. And so it's that preservation technique so appropriate that the TDA has the beehive as one of its emblems. And then the other pictograph up there shows spores or mushrooms from running figures going from the mushrooms into the brains of the running individuals. So we know from these pictographs, it's clearly for us who are skilled in the taxonomy of mushrooms that these are psilocyboid in their shape, in their morphology. These are not button mushrooms. These are not porcinis. They're cuspidate. They have a shape to them of the sharp point at the top. And then we go to Spain. And in Spain, this was suggested also that the mushrooms in the lower right there are associated with auroch, with the cattle, and these mushrooms grow out of dung. Also because of climate change. These mushrooms may not be there today. So then we advance forward to the Eleusinian mysteries, and here Demeter is giving Persephone a mushroom before she goes into the underworld. Many of you may not know the Eleusinian mysteries persisted for more than 2,000 years. Aristotle, Sophocles, Plato all partook of the Eleusinian mysteries on about a 10 to 15 mile hike, being heckled by other spectators, once in a lifetime experience where they ingested a fungal concoction. Albert Hofmann, discoverer of LSD, Carl Ruck and Jonathan Ott, suggested it was ergot. There's the major mystery and the minor mystery. But psilocybe mushrooms grow around the Thessalien in Greece, even to this day. So the Eleusinian mysteries were a pagan ritual prior to Christianity that where thousands of people would come together. Under the penalty of death, they could not speak of it. And so this remained a hidden secret, hidden, from the annals of history until more recently. Pam and I went to Egypt a few months ago. People were looking, at the glyphs and whatnot. Pam and I immediately started saying, well, let's look for mushroom glyphs. We visited 10 temples. We found mushroom glyphs on every temple. And so the mushroom shape, again, it's conic with a long stem. And the shape of the mushroom, you look at it, there's one, that's interesting. And then I found an article by Azim Abdel, and he had published in, I think, 2016, that in the temple of Hathor, who is the goddess of beauty and the protector of cattle, that he postulated that these were actually psilocybe mushrooms. Now, another researcher, Stephen Berlant, and then Kalindi, who is a good friend of mine from Detroit, he also zeroed in on the Egyptian use of psilocybin mushrooms. So let's look more closely. These are mushrooms coming out of a vase, and it's associated with the blue lotus. Now, and then the blue lotus and the mushrooms coming together, the blue lotus is a water lily growing in ponds. Psilocybe cubensis grows out of the dung of cattle. Cattle go to the ponds to drink. The blue lotus is in the ponds. The blue lotus and the mushrooms would naturally be going in close proximity. The frequency of encounter would be massive and common. And the shape of the mushrooms also resembled very much that of the vase. So the blue lotus is now scarce in Egypt because of desertification. The Temple of Hathor is one of the driest places on earth. I think 0.01 millimeters of rain per year. And we found these mushroom glyphs in all these temples. So there is now a rediscovery in Egypt by Egyptian alchemists that Pam and I met, a kind of a secret society of bringing back this ancient knowledge of combining the blue lotus with psilocybin mushrooms as an elixir, a combination of both. Now, Cleopatra was a lover of Caesar and Mark Antony, and Cleopatra actually funded the Roman army. You're with your lover, you're at the top of society. The Eleusinian mysteries are occurring during Caesar's time and Mark Antony's time. And the blue lotus, the sacred flower, and the color of gold and blue in Egyptology, is extremely significant. So the movement now in Egypt is a form of re-indigenization, rediscovering their ancient roots. And I just heard just this evening that the blue lotus extracts being combined with psilocybin mushrooms is a new thing here. So people are rediscovering their roots. So other amazing paintings in Egypt also resemble very clearly psilocybe cubensis. These glyphs are everywhere, hiding not in plain sight. If they're actually obvious, they are so obvious that they're not being seen by Egyptologists. We sent some of these images to a renowned Egyptologist. He says, they can't be mushrooms, they're shovels. I go, no. Shovels will be upside down. And so, but it's reasonable because of desertification, they're not seeing mushrooms, right? Climate has changed. So they don't have it in their ken of knowledge what these could possibly be. So these are cuspidate, psilocybe-looking mushrooms, and they're all over the temples. And no one until Abdel Abzim and Berlant noticed these, and then we were able to find many more. So an example, again, of another pictograph or glyph, and psilocybe cubensis. That's golden in color and bruises bluish. So psilocybe cubensis grows on cow dung, grows on hippopotamus dung, grows on elephant dung. So this is important that people know because psilocybe cubensis is not native to the Americas. It came out of Africa associated with cattle, is what most scientists believe. But we have excellent records of the psilocybin mushroom use by Mayans, Aztecs, and the Mazateks. And with the Aztecs specifically, we have knowledge that they used them because of a priest by the name of Sahugun, who in the 1529 described the use of psilocybin mushrooms, and they combined them with honey and chocolate. And they'd have dreams. They'd discuss their dreams. Simultaneously, almost to the very same decade, in Europe was the Bavarian Beer Purity Act that banned specifically mushrooms from beer. So adding mushrooms to honey would create psychoactive meads that Germanic ancestors were using, and then the government and the Catholic Church cracked down again on the pagan use of mushrooms. So it's amazing to me, simultaneously on different parts of the planet, very strong possibility that psilocybin mushrooms were being used in Bavaria as well. This monograph, Les Champignons du Mexique, by R. Gordon Wasson and Roger Im, illustrated these images. And then the Mayan mushroom stones that are associated with the western slope of Pacific slope of Guatemala. At the same time the Eleusinian mysteries were occurring, the Mayan mushroom stones were being made. But the oldest, they then basically, this manufacturer stopped making these in around 500. So we don't know exactly what the mushroom stones mean. Is it invoking rain? Is it like a family coat of arms? Is it celebration of psilocybin mushrooms? Or is it all those things? Shamanistically, things become spiritually important because of a multiplicity of benefits. More than one thing can be true. And that's what I think is specifically the case about psilocybin mushrooms. They have so many diverse positive consequences that they end up being elevated into a sacrament because they're so powerful for the peoples that use them. Maria Sabina was contacted by R. Gordon Wasson and this magazine, 1957, May 13th, Life magazine, millions of copies, basically a field guide and a tripping experience, was described to millions of Americans through the middle of the Cold War. Now, Maria Sabina was a practicing Catholic. And those of you who have seen her ceremonies, it's the Holy Trinity, where she's using psilocybin mushrooms, may well be the way that the Mazateks were able to preserve their indigenous use of these sacraments was adopting Catholicism sort of as an envelope of protection. But it's important to note that R. Gordon Wasson's fame today is really because of two giant women in the field of mycology. Maria Sabina was not only a Mazatec shaman, she was a mycologist. She went out and collected the mushrooms. She knew them. She engaged them. She prepared them. She was on the hunt. And Tina Wasson was a physician from Russia, but she was skilled in identification of mushrooms by Latin binomials. She knew them by name. It's because of these two women that many of us here are here today studying this subject. These two women were pivotal in opening up these doors to new knowledge. Now, I attended several lectures that R. Gordon Wasson gave, and in every single lecture, and I want to make sure the record is clear, he vociferously gave Tina Wasson and Maria Sabina credit, extolling how important they were and opening up the knowledge. He was a mycophobic person, a fear of fungi from his English background, and the Russian Tina Wasson was mycophilic. So these two women really were underappreciated, I think, the feel that they're not only medical doctors and a shaman, but they were mycologists. So what has happened is because the word got out and massive numbers of people flooded to Mexico looking for Maria Sabina, whose name was disguised in Life magazine, as well as The Village, but eventually got out through the academic circles. What's happened, and just recently, my friend Juliana Furshi went down to the Mazatec region of Oaxaca and said, Paul, something's really extraordinary is happening. Because of the interest in psilocybin mushrooms by the Mazatecs and also them, working with tourism, people coming down to experience these psilocybin mushrooms, they're scarce. They're hard to find. They're seasonal. So what they're using is psilocybe cubensis. Psilocybe cubensis is associated with cattle. Christopher Columbus brought cattle to the Caribbean in 1493. Cattle are not native to the Americas. Because of psilocybe cubensis and the knowledge now of cultivation, the Mazatecs have a sustainable supply of psilocybin mushrooms. So this is what lots of cultures do. They adopt technologies. They improve their practices. And we are seeing this all over. I visited a museum, an anthropological museum in Anchorage, Alaska. Phenomenal museum on the technology indigenous people, the Inuits, used for surviving in that climate. At the very end of the exhibit, there was a photograph of the Inuits doing their traditional seal hunting with binoculars, a rifle, and a snowmobile. They adopted that technology because it helped them pursue their indigenous practices better. This is the way. This is the way of sharing technologies to be able to be better at your indigenous practices. So, a good friend of ours, Melissa Nelson, introduced us to two-eyed seeing. So Albert Marshall is from Eastern Canada, Nova Scotia region, and he came up with the concept of two-eyed seeing. There are many indigenous people in this audience who are of mixed blood. You're not just purely Navajo or purely one indigenous person. You have a heritage also blended with Europeans. So Albert was approached by a mother saying, why do I have to have my kids in a Western school? I want to teach them only about indigenous wisdom and knowledge. And Albert, in his wisdom, said, because you need two-eyed seeing. One eye seeing with the wisdom informed by indigenous practices, the other eye seeing with Western technologies. Because with two eyes, you can see better than one. This is an example of building bridges with respect and honor, with humbleness and humility, reaching out to be able to help indigenous people continue and help them re-indigenize, which is a concept that my friend and Pam's friend Melissa Nelson, many of you may know of her from Sebastopol, California. She's half Chippewa and half Norwegian. And she has a seed preservation library of indigenous ancient seeds, corn, etc. And the term of art now is re-indigenization. Just like with the Egyptians, just like with the Druids, just like it's happening with the Mazatecs, is being able to borrow, utilize technologies that are invented by the West in order to help the indigenous peoples survive. So I want to reach out to everyone to say that the lesson of psilocybin is to share with respect. You don't want to tell people what to do. You want to ask them, how can we help? How can we be better? How can we collaborate? It's important to protect this wisdom with all the technologies that we can bring to bear so it doesn't become extinct. Psilocybe azothicorum was used by Maria Sabina. Well, we know now from DNA analysis, it's equal to Psilocybe quebecensis. It grows in Quebec. So psilocybe mushrooms are very easy to grow, Psilocybe cubensis, that is. The mycelium grows out very quickly. You can take spore prints or a culture. It forms this beautiful network, rhizomorphic mycelium. And then the mycelium can channel nuclei, and through epigenesis and a swath out about a meter across, there could be more than 1 trillion end branches. And so these are self-learning networks of knowledge. And so the interest in cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms has just revolutionized the number of strains that are being produced. And so there's tremendous diversification. Psilocybe cubensis fruits conveniently on sterilized media. Many psilocybes do not. And there's a tremendous yield of growing them on grains. So people can sterilize the grain, in a pressure cooker and then be able to grow it in their closet or their basement. And so you don't need a gatekeeper for psilocybin. Psilocybin enables everyone in this room to be able to grow your own sacrament. So when they talk about $15,000 a session for psilocybin mushrooms, you can grow them cheaper than portobellos. So I think this democratizes in such a big way to be access for people at any strata of income. So psilocybe cubensis is best picked when the veils are closed. And note that fruiting on the lower left there, that's one flush. 30% of the mass of rice became dried mushrooms, all uniformly the same size. In 27 days. Extraordinary ability to grow these. So people complain about pharma, and I'll speak to this to a greater degree later, but psilocybin mushrooms enable all of you to have access to the divine, all of you to have access to universal consciousness. There's so much more to the reality than that which we perceive. Those of you who've done psilocybin mushrooms know this very well. Those of you who have not done, you don't know this. People speak about the ineffable, not being able to communicate. We see right now through a very thin slice of a reality that's much grander, much more ubiquitous, that's all around us all the time, listening, communicating. So we move forward to 1977. Andy Weil published in the Botanical Hardware leaflets the sudden interest in psilocybin mushrooms and collecting them in Oregon. We started doing some conferences. That's my first attempt at growing psilocybe cubensis in the pressure cooker. And that's what I look like. And I'm here with Dr. Gaston Guzman. And Gaston Guzman wrote a monograph on psilocybe, and we went from Southern Oregon all the way up to Vancouver, BC. You can imagine what the border security people did when we were all in the same car. The border security, the immigration officer said, Gaston, are you okay? Because you don't look like you would be with these people. And we assured them it was fine. But then we collected many, many specimens for his monograph on the genus psilocybe. We started doing conferences in 1979. It started in 1977. This event tonight is a continuum, stretching all the way back to the Eleusinian mysteries, stretching all the way back to the Mayan use of mushrooms, to northern Algeria, in the Sicilian Ajar Plateau. We are a community that has come together. We're trying to preserve this sacred knowledge at a time where there's been so much oppression to try to squash it and keep it from the people. So because I had a DA license, it was a state of high paranoia, but the license that I had was able to have an envelope of protection. So we did these conferences. They were very, very, we had one conference, we didn't even tell the participants where they were going. We picked them up in buses. We took them to a Miller Sylvania State Park. And then, so it's hard to describe how paranoid we were because we were so fearful of being persecuted. We went on to do more conferences. Terrence McKenna and I became good friends. I have a number of books out, but Terrence's book and Dennis's book, Psilocybin Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide, really exposed so many people to the cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms. And then, because I knew the Merry Pranksters, I knew as a friend of Ken Kesey's, and those of you know about the Merry Pranksters and Ken Kesey and Jack Kerouac and, On the Road and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I also knew the psychedelic scientists. Because I had this Venn intersection of interest, I decided to put on a conference to bring them together. So in this photograph is Sasha and Ann Shulgin, Ken Kesey, the Merry Pranksters, Andy Weil, Gary Linkoff, and many other people. So I'm blessed to have rediscovered some psilocybin mushrooms in nature. Psilocybe azurescens, potentially the most potent psilocybin mushroom in the world. Psilocybe wiley, which I named after Dr. Andrew Weil, very similar to Psilocybe cerulescens. Psilocybe cyanofabulosa, which means blue hairs, and Psilocybe liniformis variety americana. And as Sarah mentioned, I'm so honored that Juliana Furshey and Brent Dentlinger named a new species of psilocybin, Psilocybe Stametsi. So I have a species named after myself. Okay, so now let's go on to mushroom hunts. Do you want to go on a mushroom hunt? Okay, you have to be careful out there, folks. These things are very, very difficult to identify if you are not skilled with information that will prevent you from poisoning. So here is a recent mushroom hunt. Pam and I went up into the Olympics for several days, and we'll look at...
Hi, folks. I'm deep in the old-growth forest, and you can call this the trail of death or the trail of enlightenment. I say that not facetiously because this is a deadly poisonous Galerina marginata. It's got a ring, not all the time, but it's a rusty brown spores. Now, about 20 or so of these could kill you. And just a few feet away, come on over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps away, we have Psilocybe pelliculosa, a psilocybin active psilocybe mushroom. And Psilocybe pelliculosa is low potency. It's got a separable gelatinous pellicle, that's skin there. It's got purple-brown spores. Galerinas have rusty brown spores. But this is why you should be so careful. This is a mushroom you should take seriously. The potential for poisoning is extremely high. So not for even those people who call themselves experts, you really need to know this species and know your Galerinas. But what a wonderful thing. And the mushrooms continue all the way down here. Happiness. Like a little grouping here of Psilocybe pelliculosa. More Psilocybe pelliculosa over here. And it's a gorgeous species. You can see the purple-brown spores on top of the cap. It fell from the adjacent cap. So there you have it, Psilocybe pelliculosa.
So there's one species, and now we'll look at Psilocybe cyanescens. And so Sarah and Steve and the designers, when you showed me the new pavilion, I love the shape of it because it's very psilocybin-like in so many ways. Psilocybes tend to bruise bluish, as you know. So this is Psilocybe cyanescens, and this is a naturalized patch of Psilocybe cyanescens in Canada. And they come up in wood chips, and usually in September through November. It's very easy to naturalize these in your backyard. They're growing all the way from Southern California to British Columbia to New York State, all over Europe. And it looks like Psilocybe cyanescens is native to North America, specifically Washington and Oregon. And then when rhododendrons were taken to the Kew Gardens in 1948, then the Psilocybe mushrooms colonized Europe. And now Psilocybe cyanescens is all over Europe, originating, it looks like, from Washington and Oregon, coming in from the plants that the botanical gardens imported from the United States. So, panspermia, right? This is the flow of genetic material across, divides. Now we'll look at Psilocybe azurescens.
Greetings, and meet Psilocybe azurescens. Psilocybe azurescens is probably one of the most potent mushrooms in the world. It contains psilocybin and psilocin up to 2% of its dried mass. Now think of that. 2% of the dried mass of this mushroom are psychoactive crystals. Why would a mushroom produce so much? We don't know, but it certainly has attracted the interest of humans. The bluing that you see here is a bruising reaction. It's indicative of psilocin as it degrades. And the more bluing you see, the more psilocin there once was. Now, psilocybin dephosphorylates into psilocin, and when you ingest these mushrooms, psilocin becomes a serotonin agonist. It means that the psilocybin or the psilocin becomes a temporary neurotransmitter, opening up the floodgates of the senses. Now, this mushroom is sinuous. It's got a sinuous stem, which means it bends back and forth. It's bluing very, very strongly, and it has these very indicative spore color here on the annular zone. And the spore color is purple-brown, and the mushrooms are bluish. Those two features in combination pretty much de facto determines its psilocybin. Now look how bodacious the rhizomorphs are at the base of the stem. This is a large psilocybin, by far the largest one that I know that grows on wood chips in the Pacific Northwest. It is now a popular one to have in your backyard. It's just fun. It's just naturalized in the woods here. And this is a beautiful fruiting of them. And the psilocybins, many of the woodland psilocybins have this chestnut brown to caramel color. This one is unique in that it's got these umbos, and it's a broad umbo, and the cap is very circular. The bruising reactions just from impact of rain, perhaps. This mushroom is one of the most fascinating and interesting ones to grow. Those who choose to partake of this mushroom should be warned. These are exceptionally potent, and oftentimes they can cause temporary paralysis, loss of muscle control. So that is not a good thing. It seems that most people who boil this mushroom in hot water, those symptoms seem to be alleviated. But this is clearly a sacred species, and I love just personally touching it. This is not a mushroom that I enjoy eating. It's almost too potent for me. But it is a species that I greatly admire. I love touching it. I love handling it. I love seeing it. And it's a great indicator of the habitat in my magical mushroom forest that is very conducive to spiritual experiences.
So then the final, next to the final one, we'll look at psilocybe semilanceata, the liberty cap, which is associated with sheep and cattle, which also did not arrive until the Europeans brought them with them. So we think, most of us scientists think that psilocybe semilanceata came over with the cattle and sheep, and now it's rampant all over the northwestern North America and also in the Nova Scotia and that region. So this is psilocybe semilanceata.
Throughout the temperate regions of Europe and the Pacific Northwest, one of the most interesting psilocybes to collect is one that grows near ponds in the grass. And this field has not had cows on it for more than 10 years. So cows and sheep can help, but they're not necessary. And this is psilocybe semilanceata, the famed liberty cap. It's exquisite little fruiting here. It's got a translucent striate margin. You can see the striations. They're actually the gills showing through the cap. And the cap also has a separable gelatinous pellicle. So here is one over here that we can look at. And as you tear the cap, there is a film that's clearly visible. And you can say, whoa, that's a really big one. That film stretches and then breaks. So these mushrooms have purple-brown spores, a separable gelatinous pellicle, and they typically have a sharp umbo or nipple at the very, very top of the cap. And this papilla or nipple is not always in every specimen, but it's quite characteristic of the species in general. So psilocybe semilanceata. Many people, when they pick semilanceata, they don't realize that the stem is so long. I think it's a mutualistic species with the rhizomes of grass, almost like a pseudo-mycorrhizal relationship, which means it's not obligatory, but it benefits from it. And the stems often are picked because people don't realize that the stem length goes way, way down. So be careful. Always try to get the base of the stem if you can.
And so the majority of pasture grasses also were brought over by the Europeans. Just think about it. In your garden, the majority of species in your garden are not from the ecosystem. So, it's very common for humans to bring in seeds and grasses and animals in order to sustain them. So you can't make this one up. This is such a strange story.
It only shows on boats.
Okay, this is July 8th, 2011, and it's just hard to believe that Paul Stamets' boat will be growing a psychoactive mushroom, but it's true. I know it's not the best specimen right now, but this is Gymnophilus luteofolius. It is unique to alder. It's a very rare species. In fact, most mycologists would not be able to identify it. I just happen to have a specialty in this area. And it's so weird because my friend Clay here, hey Clay, he said he found a mushroom going off of a boat and he brought it to me from your friend right?
That Harstein Island boat launch.
And it was also Gymnopolis luteofolius. So it begs the question now, is this mushroom indigenous to Northwest boats? And I've never found this in the wild. I've seen it at a mycological society, but go figure. Now, I'm not going to pick it, so I guess I'm not breaking the law. Or am I breaking the law because it's growing here and I know what it is? I don't know what to do. Anyhow, how bizarre. Gymnopolis luteofolius on Stamets' boat, and we've had more than one sighting of this on this boat, and more than one boat now, 2 boats. So go figure.
So this brings up even an interesting question. Now, the boat is trimmed with alder, Alnus rubra. It's used commonly for boats. And so think about all the boats have gone all around the world, and the boats are rotting. And it's well established that these boats, when they're no longer seaworthy, they're broken down to build houses. So they're full of mycelium. So when these mycelial footprints are coming in from old rotting boats, and there's drift logs going across the Pacific and the Atlantic and floating in the oceans. So the mushrooms are very clever in being able to propagate themselves. Okay, so those are 5 different psilocybe mushrooms. My new book covers about 70, 75 species. It should be out next year. And I'm just having a blast writing it. Because I emphasize in the book at the very beginning of the identification section all the lookalikes. And no other book has done this before. So it has all the toxic, poisonous lookalikes, and it has all the non-toxic lookalikes. Because you're going to find the lookalikes first. You're not going to find a psilocybin mushroom initially, but many of them are indicator species of the habitat that's conducive for them. So stay tuned for that. Now I want to shift more into the science of the therapeutic use of psilocybin mushrooms. And what I'm going to show first is 4 meta-surveys that are large surveys analyzing people who are using psilocybin mushrooms and the associated potential benefits that are being seen in the meta-analysis. First, we have this meta-analysis basically of prisoners, 485,000 prisoners surveyed. If there was a use of psilocybin mushroom by the prisoner, it was associated with a 27% decrease odds of past year larceny and theft, significant decreases of property crime, and also violent crime. So that's interesting. Psilocybin mushroom use is associated with a reduction in antisocial criminal behavior. Then when you look at 1,266 community members, ages between 16 and 70, and it turns out that if your partner had a psilocybin or LSD experience in their past, statistically significant reduction in partner-to-partner violence. Think of that. Any of you are in the dating ecosystem, you might want on your dating app to see, have you used psilocybin before in the past? You progress forward if you have. So, but think of that. Significant reduction in crime, significant reduction in violent behavior. And then with opioid use, psilocybin was the only psychedelic that is associated with a reduction in opioid use disorder. How many people here have family, friends that they know who have suffered from opioid use or from fentanyl, overdoses, etc.? Can I raise your hands? It's affected my family. When you have a heroin addict in your family, you don't want to talk about it. They're ashamed. They're self-medicating. I didn't understand my family member's pain. I looked at him as being a failure. I wasn't educated to understand well enough. Now we know that psilocybin use can be a major tool therapeutically in breaking addictive behavior. Because of the clinical studies that are coming out showing that psychedelics are so powerful in breaking addiction, when you meet somebody whose neighbor, who has a family member, who's suddenly no longer an addict, who's turned their life around, like a pebble in a pond. That pebble goes into the pond, and there's these emanations and circles of positivity. You do want to talk about it. You want to tell how proud you are that your son is no longer an addict, that your daughter is no longer an addict. This is something that is so important for the commons. And then nature relatedness. I think a lot of us know about this. When you do psilocybin, you're more interested in protecting the environment, protecting nature, going on nature walks, being with your children, taking them out, being with your family. This is extraordinary. Think of the billions of dollars that can be saved. Psilocybin mushrooms and psilocybin is a medicine from history that has so many applications today. Many states and countries are decriminalizing. As we well know, 3 more states have just been added to the list just recently. Almost 80% of Canadians vote for the decriminalization and the legalization of therapeutic use of psilocybin. At clinicaltrials.gov right now, as of yesterday, 140 clinical trials on psilocybin. 140. Now, these clinical trials went through a peer, review boards, RRB boards, to make sure they were safe. They are treating a problem that other medicines cannot treat. They're scalable. They're affordable. So it's extraordinary. There's so many clinical trials approved by the U.S. government. And many of these clinical trials are progressing. But there's a big problem with clinical trials, and it's the placebo effect. And so I can't summarize this better than this cartoon that was published. So the gold standard of the placebo double-blind controlled study is just not appropriate here, folks. And so many of the studies are using niacin as a positive control. But then the people flush red, they get itchy, they're beet red, and they know they got the placebo, right? They don't have liftoff into the stars. They're hot and sweaty and itchy. So another clinical study came out from Johns Hopkins by our good friend Roland Griffiths, which is the first one on the naturalistic use of psilocybin, about 3 grams. Statistically significant persistent reductions in anxiety, depression, alcohol use. 11% of the people did not benefit. Now, this connectogram here is just an illustration of how the brain is rewired and has alternative and more pathways to be able to process information. 5 clinical studies that I'll show. There's 3 of them here on depression. Statistically significant. These are double-blind, placebo-controlled as best as that goes, but shows that psilocybin is a very strong antidepressive medicine. With tobacco, one of the most addictive substances known, is 67% of the individuals were not smoking tobacco 1 year later from 2 high doses of psilocybin. Many of the patients, alcohol, opium, tobacco, from a psilocybin mushroom experience, the next day, they look at the substance and say, why? I don't need this. Just like that. Now, this is so extraordinarily impactful when you look at binge drinking, double-blind, placebo-controlled, also reduction in binge alcohol consumption. Now, psilocybin has a PR problem. It sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? We're all taught if it sounds too good to be true, then it can't be true. Well, that's the rule, but there's always exceptions to rules. And so I think psilocybin is fundamentally different in being able to rewire our neurological pathways for alternative pathways that we then will become resident with those pathways that we can revisit. Roland Griffiths, for his first studies, 14 months later, after doing a heavy dose of psilocybin, the act of remembering the experience they found to be therapeutically beneficial. 30% of the people did not benefit. 70% of the people did. But the 30% of the people who did not have a good experience the negativity of the experience did not extend beyond the experience itself, where the positive consequences of those people who had a positive experience extended out 14 months later. Because by remembering that experience, you're reactivating the neurological pathways that gave you that benefit. This is why microdosing makes sense. It's a form of remembering and revisiting the neurological pathways that gave you the epiphany of a higher dose. So let's look at psilocybe cubensis. Psilocybe cubensis can have up to 4% psilocybin. So 1% psilocybin is approximately 10 milligrams by dry weight. A microdose is 1/10 of a liftoff dose, so it's basically about 1 milligram, equivalent to the pure psilocybin molecule. So basically, you're taking 1 gram of psilocybe cubensis dry weight, you're making 1/10 of a gram. That is a microdose. So the microdosing studies that we've been involved in showed about 78% of them were taking the low and medium dose between 1/10 of a gram to 1/3 of a gram of psilocybe cubensis. So this is really interesting to us. And we were involved with Quantified Citizen for creating an app on microdosing. There's over 25,000 people in this app. You can download it for the Droid or the iOS devices, Apple devices. It's available at microdose.me. And after you register as anonymized, you own your own data. Then it gives you a series of tests. How much you're microdosing, what are you combining with? You're combining it with chocolate, you're combining it with lion's mane. How frequently are you consuming this? And so it's a massive data set, a meta study. So challenge tests with memory, acoustics, vision, etc. So we have millions and millions of data points. You can imagine 25,000 participants with dozens and dozens of questions. And these questions are questions that are standardized, used in psychotherapy, and for those physicians studying people with dementia, Parkinson's, traumatic brain injuries, etc. So we published first in Nature in Science. And in this subset, there's 3,486 people. And we found something that was extraordinary because of the stack, known as the Stamets stack. I named it after myself because I have too many examples where I come up with an idea, someone takes the idea from me, and they say it's their idea. So I said, okay, screw it. I'm going to name this thing after myself. So, it became known as the Stamets stack. And the Stamets stack is a combination of microdosing with lion's mane mushroom mycelium and nicotinic acid, niacin, the flushing form. I had this epiphany that because niacin is a vasodilator, psilocybin is a vasoconstrictor, if you have vasodilation, and because neuropathies and the endpoints of the peripheral nervous system often represent themselves as deadening of the fingertips and the toes, with vasodilation, you have more delivery of the beneficial effects of psilocybin. And then because niacin, nicotinic acid, makes you flush and itch, I thought, wow, those nerve endings are being excited. Let's add niacin to that. Moreover, if you have a lot of niacin, it can become an adversive, like the antabuse to alcoholics, because you flush so intensely. So for multiple reasons, I put these things together. I'm well versed in medicinal mushrooms. There's several studies on lion's mane mushrooms that increase myelin regeneration in the axons of nerves and causes NGF, nerve growth factors, to be expressed. So I thought, wow, let's bundle niacin, psilocybin, lion's mane together. In the microdose.me study, we found significant reductions in depression and anxiety, as we did with psilocybin by itself. But so that was sort of clouded. We saw both reductions, but nothing significant with the Stamets stack. And so I was talking to Pam, and I said, all of these studies about anxiety and depression, they're so interpretive, they're so subjective. Don't we have a objective test? And she goes, yeah, we have a psychomotor test in the app. So we zeroed into that database, and it's the finger tapping test. This is a well vetted and used test for testing people who are suffering from Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's. How rapidly can you tap your two fingers together in 10 seconds? You can do a lot faster when you're 22, when you're 82, obviously, age-related neuropathies. So we zeroed into that data set, and we found something truly extraordinary, which we then published again in Nature. And we found that the Stamets stackers in 30 days compared to psilocybin in any other form, psilocybin with chocolate, psilocybin by itself, psilocybin mushrooms that is, the people who use that stack of those three compounds together, their tapping frequency increased from 43 taps to 73 taps in 30 days. That's not subjective. The significance there is hard to write off. You can't say it's random with one chance in 250 significance that this data is solid. So this really was a validation that this stack combination could lead to something that's really important. How many elderly people fall, break their hip, go to the hospital, get an infection, and die? How many older instructors teaching the guitar or playing a piano or typing on a computer lose their psychomotor ability due to age-related neuropathy? So the idea of being able to increase your motor skills and dexterity crosses over to athleticism. Now, it's important is the 55-plus-year-olds that we saw the signal, not with the younger people. So it's people over the age of 55. So this got popularized, and then I could not believe it. 20 companies used my name and started selling psilocybin products with my name on it. Not a single one of them asked for permission, right? So, boy, you talk about appropriation, I can feel it here, So I had sent letters to the east of them, cease and desist, because I crossed the border all the time. Can you imagine? Stamets, you're selling psilocybin mushrooms. No, I'm not, officer. So anyhow, this has become very common. My lawyer said, it's kind of a compliment. And I go, no, it's not, So there's a lot of controversy around microdosing, like it wouldn't work. And then we believe that it will. And we believe bundling it with a macrodose, followed up with microdoses, probably will create the neurological pathways on the macrodose, and the microdose then will reinforce those pathways so you have an alternative neurological network to be able to utilize. And so this was poo-pooed by a lot of scientists until this study came out. 2 papers, one in Cell, one with about 20 authors, that found that psilocybin binds with TrkB. TrkB is a MAP kinase receptor that when psilocybin binds with it, it stimulates what's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factors, that causes stem cells to differentiate into newborn neurons, which is thought not to be possible 2 decades ago, that older people could not build new neurons. And in fact, brain neurons. In fact, we know this is true. But the article that came out over on the left with the antidepressants shows that psilocybin binds with the SSRI antidepressants and the TrkB, the antidepressants work because of binding the TrkB. Psilocybin binds to the same approved antidepressant medicines 1,000 times more than SSRIs. So you have 1 to 1,000. You have 1/10 of a gram of psilocybe cubensis versus 5 grams, or you have 1 milligram versus 50 milligrams. Where is it on that spectrum? Well, I can tell you for sure, a microdose is going to be more than 1. It's going to be less than 1,000, but it's going to be better than the SSRIs at binding to TrkB, if this is the root reason why SSRIs work. So I think we're onto something really big here. I think that binding with these TrkBs can create newborn neurons that can be helpful for Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, for all, not only antidepressant, for increasing neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, etc. So the bottom line hypothesis is that the combination of these compounds can increase psychomotor skills. Psilocybin increases neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, even at lower doses. So where we go from here? Well, we need clinical trials to be able to prove this. Clinical trials with microdosing will work with a placebo because they're sensorium. The definition of microdosing is that you can't feel it. I don't actually like subsensorium. I like to say non-intoxicating. Because when you microdose, you feel better, colors are brighter, but it doesn't affect your driving, so you're not intoxicated. So I'd like to redefine microdosing as being non-intoxicating doses of psilocybin. So there's multiple ways and delivery systems, and here we owe it to the Aztecs for informing us about using chocolate and honey to make your own little chocolates. When you make microdoses and you make chocolate in your house, you wanted to keep it out of the reach of children, unsuspecting adults. And if you label it laxative, that usually keeps people away from it. So I spoke about the blue lotus and the bluing. And so some of us psychonauts have discovered blue juice coming from psilocybe mushrooms. Look how beautiful that is. I'm in love with the color blue. This is why I wear my blue scarf. But that's from psilocybe cubensis. And it forms an indigo-like substance that is very dark cerulean blue. So I want to end in speaking that the use of psilocybin for neuroplasticity, for neurogenesis, is for the central and peripheral and the autonomic nervous system. This could help us regenerate nerves throughout our entire body. We all suffer from age-related neuropathy and neurodegeneration. How many scientists are we losing? How many great musicians? How many elders with encyclopedic knowledge that our society is being robbed of? It takes us as a community and as citizen scientists to step forward to experiment, to help inform other scientists, clinicians, and doctors what will work. Now, I want to just speak a little bit about my own history here. I come from a conservative family. I grew up in a charismatic Christian environment. My family historically have been farmers, wheat growers. Conservatives don't take risks, especially farmers. Their margins of profitability are so slim. Trying something new is very, very dangerous. But liberals tend to take risks. They're risk takers. They push the envelope of change. They fail a lot. I would suggest they fail a lot more than conservatives. Conservatives conserve that which is known, and because that's a stable platform to build from. But liberals are adventurous. They're taking risks and changes. This also speaks to our society. We need the edge runners. Those of you who are different, maybe you're from the LGBTQ community, maybe you're just weird. We need you. Conservatives need the liberals in order to push the envelopes of change to find that which is worthy of conserving. This is the yin-yang of our society. It is so important that we march together as a community. Now, I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about breaking news. We're all going to die. What's going to happen? This is from the Max Planck Laboratory. And there's 1 parsec. Astronomical unit is the distance between the Earth and the Sun. The universe is designed as a network-based system, like that of the mycelium, like that of neurons. I believe matter begets life. Life becomes single cells. Single cells replicate, become linear. They branch, they form networks. There's mosaics of interlacing networks. This is the way. This is the way of being, of matter, of life, of neurology, of mycelium. These are self-replicating networks based on evolutionary successes. The divine assembly could also be called the divine assembly of molecules. We all demolecularize upon our deaths. Will we return to fundamental atoms that will be resorted, realigned, recomposited? We may die, but we will never cease to exist. That epiphany that came to me on a psilocybin trip has given me great solace about my own mortality. We have this temporary form of a human life. It's time for us to bury the hatchets. It's time for us to reach hands across the divides, across continents, cultures, across centuries. We are all one together. We are all one indigenously to the earth. We've diversified. It's our diversification, it's our biodiversity that gives us our strength. It's important that we all recognize that our differences are to be celebrated. I love weird people. So many of you are weird. Fundamentally, I believe psilocybin can reduce crime. I believe that law enforcement officers and doctors need psilocybin. Think about soldiers that are suffering from PTSD. They cannot be right 100% of the time. One bad day, one accident with a soldier, with a law enforcement officer, haunts them for the rest of their life. There's a monkey on their back that can never change. Psilocybin is important for all these people to be able to reconcile, to overcome their trauma, to be able to help. The Divine Assembly, the Healing Warrior Church in Austin, that's specifically for law enforcement, special forces, SEALs, Rangers, they're bringing people in with that type of trauma. I believe psilocybin makes nicer people. Thank you very much.
That was so beautiful.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Started losing my voice there. Sorry.
No, do what you need to. Well, you are such a beautiful human. Thank you for being here. And thank you for that message.
Thank you.
All right, let's see if we can't stump him, shall we? First question. What can the average citizen do to improve societal perceptions of psychedelics?
Join the Divine Assembly Church. No, I think Dr. Pam said it very well. We don't need to be on a quote-unquote crusade. We don't need to convince anybody. I think your life, your actions, your change of your life, when you meet these addicts and these people who resolve PTSD, they are a bright bulb, a bright light, a beacon that will draw other people to this lighthouse of knowledge. And I think the best way and the most powerful thing that people can do is to walk their talk and to be humble about it. I mean, and this is important for everyone to know here. Think about this. You are less than the 1%. We have these experiences. We know these things to be true. 99+% of people don't know this. So we need to have a tipping point, a tidal change. We cannot do that forcibly. We have to do that with humility, being humble. And the fourth things that have steered my life, informed by psilocybin, which is my guiding ethos of my life, is courage, kindness, knowledge, and strength. Those four things, I think if we all, for me, by following those four things, I'm successful today because I follow those four things. I've never chased money. Money's come to me because I think other people believe in the same things that I believe. And so I think that's all that we can do is show by example. We don't need to over-explain this.
Thank you. Thank you. What are your thoughts on the recent study coming out of the University of Utah and the Natural History Museum of Utah, especially your thoughts on the proposed gastropod hypothesis?
Okay, so the big question has been, why are mushrooms producing psilocybin? You know, some of us think, well, because they want to communicate with us. But sort of physiologically, why would these compounds being produced up to 4% of the dried mass of the mushroom? An article in 2017 proposed that psilocybin was an insecticide. I just read it again just before my talk to make sure I was accurate. I did contact the authors because they thought psilocybin would kill insects. And I contacted the lead author. I said, have you collected Psilocybe cubensis in Texas, Florida, Mexico? And he said, no. So if you have collected psilocybe mushrooms, you would know they'd be riddled with insect larvae if you didn't dry them fast enough or they were too old. So he kind of went, oh. But they published their article, and then Brent Dentlinger and I had a conversation on gastropods. He came up with the same idea that I came up with. No, it's not an insecticide, but it wouldn't be. Mushrooms want to encourage insects, like with bees, with buzz pollination. With psilocybe mushrooms, two spores have to come together and mate. So entropy does not help psilocybin mushrooms because your mating pair gets more distant, as inverse square of distance, as it spreads out from the mother mushroom. But flies coming in get spores on their wings, and the flies go elsewhere. So the two spores that need to mate could be on the fly's wings, and they're much more proximate. So dicaryons, as we know, the mycelium then can produce a mushroom. It's much more advantageous to have an insect as a vector. But then the gastropods, slugs and snails, are opposite that. Because they come in and they consume the mushrooms before sporulation, or at sporulation. So it makes sense that gastropods, the psilocybin would not. So we have Dr. Pam and I made a video. Thank you, Pam, for reminding me of this. We're being citizen scientists. So I'm going to show this little video. It's very short. It's a time lapse with psilocybe cyanescens that we found growing wildly. And the garden giant, Stropharia rugosa annulata, which is an edible mushroom that grows in the garden. It's very big. Stropharia rugosa annulata has no psilocybin. Psilocybe cyanescens is packed with psilocybin. So Pam and I had fun, and we got 10 slugs. We put them in the middle of a box, and then we'll show the movie. So here it is. You can see they like the garden giant.
Yeah.
And they tunnel through it. It comes to the psilocybe mushrooms. I think they bump it once. But they leave the psilocybe mushrooms untouched. So I think Brent's hypothesis and that of Alexander Bradshaw does make sense.
Yeah.
That psilocybin could also, and more than one thing can be true, right? That's the way of nature. That's the way of the entourage, the synergy effect.
Yeah.
It's not because one thing has a singularity. It's because of a multiplicity of benefits. So I think it preserves the psilocybin, maybe it preserves the mushrooms for us to enjoy.
I love it. So we have to. It's our responsibility.
I think it is.
All right. I liked this question. What was your best mushroom trip ever?
Well, I have several caveats. This experience did not occur in the United States. in case the DEA is listening. It was under a physician's guidance. This is deeply personal. I've told this story to, I think, 4 people, all of whom encouraged me to speak about it publicly. And it's very core to my very being. This was about 6 weeks ago in a foreign country. There's cyanescens growing in the wild, kind of waving at me. Hi, Paul. And I haven't journeyed in about 6 months. And I thought, this is a good time for me to do a journey. So we found a fantastic place. It's a cove right on the ocean, salt water. And we set up our camp the day before, put out our bed out, put up our tent. Very remote, no one around, with one other person. And we built a fire, constructed the fire before we did the journey. Then I like to do the journey just as the sun is setting. So we made our tea for the cyanescens, and we put our teacups to the sun. And just as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, and then we honored the earth, honored our ancestors and descendants, to all sentient beings, to all matter, to Gaia, to the universe. And then we drank the tea. It was a high dose, about probably the equivalency of between 40 and 50 milligrams of psilocybin. And then I knew it's going to come on fast, so I better start my fire. So I went over to the fire. It was a fire about this high with logs. And it had rained for about a week before, so there was no danger. It was a good time to start a fire. Beautiful blue sky day. So we started the fire. The fire's going, and then the mushrooms started coming on and on. And when I first did mushrooms, I laughed and laughed and laughed. I laughed so much my cheeks would hurt from laughing, with a smile on my face. Now, as I told my friend, I'm silent. I don't talk for hours. It's all internal for me. I'm just thinking about spiritual things that are really important to me. So the mushrooms came on. They're coming on really strong, really fast. So we both had the same experience where the sun had gone down. 40 minutes later, it's dark. Stars were coming out. Gorgeous, gorgeous, setting. And I'm laying there and my eyes are closed and I open them up and I had all this noise, all these random thoughts. Did I pay that bill? What about my daughter's issues? What about the business? What about these persons? Why'd that person look at me that way? Just all these different things, like all this chaos of thinking. And I'm saying, Stamets, you're on a journey. You need to pay attention. All these noisy thoughts going through, and then I saw a little dot. And the little dot got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I only said 5 or 6 sentences in 6 hours. And I told my friend, I see an eye. I see an eye of a whale. And this big whale eye is in there. And like many of you, you're sensitive to your body, your heartbeat, your blood flow. To me, it was my breathing. So I go, and the eye was there. And I told my friend, I see an eye of a whale. And then my breathing changed and it went. I did that repeatedly. And then I told my friend, I'm swimming with whales. I am a whale. I was concerned that my friend would think like this was disturbing to her. But I continued. This went on for many minutes. And then whales showed up right beside our camp with a roaring fire. 2 big humpback whales came, and then I mind melded with the whales. We squeezed our hands in disbelief, and the whales stayed with us for 6 hours through the entire experience. At one point, we got up to look at them because they were so close. And I wanted to get up again because they came really close, just a few feet away. It was a very deep cliff that we're right beside. They were right beside us. And my friend said, you don't need to get up. You're with them now. We are with them now. And so then the whale spoke and says, now you are quiet enough. You've slowed down enough. It is time for you to listen. We are all one. You need to lead. You need to understand that we are all here with you. You move too fast. You make too much noise. You don't pay attention. It's time for you to be with us. The whales stayed with us, and those of you who are around humpbacks, they're moving back and forth. They don't stay. They stayed with us for 6 hours. 5 hours into the experience, they made a sound very much like this. They began to speak in sentences above water. My friend is very experienced with whales, had never in her life, for 30 years around whales, had ever heard anything like this. And the whale spoke 6 or 7 sentences back and forth. And the other one went. And they spoke back and forth, and we realized they were speaking in complete sentences to us and to each other. And then with that, they left. Dawn came. We packed up our tent. We just looked at each other in disbelief. How is this possible? We realized we entered into a field of universal consciousness. There is so much more around us. How do you explain this if you're doing it at Johns Hopkins inside of a hospital environment? It's not the same thing. I would not be surprised if many of you have had similar experiences to this, where you realize that nature is one giant consciousness. And we are just a small part of that. But when we connect, we have this internet of possibilities, these nodes of crossing with all these other sentient beings. And the experience was profoundly spiritual to me. Profoundly. So next morning we packed up. We went about 2 miles away, and the whales followed us. They stayed with us for the entire day.
Wow.
Hanging out as if to say hi, and then flap their tail and their splash. They were kind of showing off to us, saying, see, we're still here. Now, what's the probability of that happening? It happened. It struck me deeply to my core. And I realized we're all capable of this. And I will also, even though I'm not, ethnically an indigenous person from North America, but I told a shaman friend of mine who's the shaman of the Haida Gwaii off of British Columbia, very powerful totem pole maker. And he chuckled and laughed. He goes, yeah, this happens, Paul. So I feel like I connected with indigenous wisdom of the entire planet. So this is the first time I've ever shared this with anybody in this group. So.
Wow. What an incredible gift. Thank you for sharing that with us. I don't want to ask any more questions. I think we should end right there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ha ha ha.